The final item of business today is the members' business debate on motion number 3921 in the name of Kevin-Stewart on Aberdeen-City-Centre. This debate will be concluded without any questions being put, and I would be grateful if those members who wish to speak in the debate could please press the request to speak buttons as soon as possible. And I call on Kevin-Stewart to open the debate. Mr Stewart, 7 minutes.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. It may have escaped some folks' notice, but I am an Aberdonian. Born and bred, I'm proud of the Granite City, and I'm proud of the vision that led to the construction of Union Bridge and Union Street, which led to Aberdeen having a vibrant heart fit for that era. Men like James Matthews, a great architect who was an apprentice of the legendary Archibald Simpson, was one of the men who was at the forefront of designing great buildings and places, such as the Grammar School, the Tivoli and the Music Hall. Matthews, who also became Lord Provost of the city, also designed Union Terrace, and I understand that his great ambition was to cover over the railway line that runs near to that great city thoroughfare. Let's move on from Matthews' great 19th century vision to today's Aberdeen, an Aberdeen that could see the covering over of the railway and road that run through the Denburn, an Aberdeen that could see the amount of green space in its city centre expanded greatly and made more accessible than it currently is, an Aberdeen with an eye to the future. Like many big schemes, the City Garden project is not without controversy, and it would be fair to say that the proposed city centre development polarised the views of Aberdonians. The polarisation of views was exacerbated by the many myths that were peddled about the scheme and who was likely to profit from it. And let's be honest, as far as I'm concerned, the only folk that were going to benefit were Aberdonians. But because of that polarisation, Presiding Officer, I, as a councillor at the time, put it to the council that a referendum should be held on the issue to get the true views of Aberdonians, so that people who make decisions could actually take the decisions knowing full well what the views of the majority of Aberdonians were. That referendum took place. 45,301 people voted for the City Gardens project, and 41,175 voted for the retention of UTG, a majority of 4,126. Now, we have seen in recent times that referendum result being ignored by the Labour-led administration in Aberdeen. I believe that that is completely and utterly anti-democratic and goes against the wishes of Aberdonians that took the time to vote in that referendum. And since then, we have seen a situation whereby the Labour Party does not know where it's going in terms of dealing with Aberdeen. Some of them say that the referendum result really shouldn't stand anyway, because it wasn't a real referendum. But I would argue that the Labour Party actually legitimised that referendum by actually coming out as a campaigning organisation on the run-up to that vote. I certainly will.
Rhoda Grant.
Would the member agree that there were lessons to be learned about the conduct of a referendum from the experience in Aberdeen to make sure that once you call the referendum, the results of that can be abided by everybody, rather than pulling together a referendum that is skewed and subject to being misrepresented?
Kevin-Stewart.
That is a very strange intervention indeed, I have to say, because there were supporters, pro and anti the City Garden project, who were in favour of that referendum and were quite happy about the way it was conducted until after the result was announced. And I think Ms Grant actually is slurring Crawford Langley, who was the independent officer who was dealing with that referendum, a man who I have great respect for, who has conducted numerous elections in his career. I'm going to move on. No, I'm going to move on because I'm going to come to you, Mr MacDonald, actually, later on in my speech. What are the Labour plans now? We've seen them reject TIF, a business case which, shall we say, probably had great benefit for Aberdeen and would have likely left with £36 million after all of the loan was paid off for Aberdeen to invest in further infrastructure. What is the transformational project that Labour wants to see? Well, we have seen that change day by day. We have seen them in recent times come out in favour of the pedestrianisation of Union Street, but the day after they weren't quite sure about that, and I'm sure we're going to hear more about that later. But in order to do some of the things which they have said, you actually need to put other things in place, which include improving the road network, such as the Buried End corridor, which Labour rejected, Third Dawn Crossing, which Labour rejected, and of course the Hadigan roundabout, and Labour rejected the proposal for that too. So what are Labour's great plans for the city? Today we have heard the council leader say that he has written to the infrastructure secretary saying that he wants her to back and pay for a rail link to the airport. No plans, no strategic plan to do so, but he expects the Cabinet Secretary to put her hand in her pocket and do that. Nonsense is what I say to that. Tomorrow, he's likely to come out in favour of the Eastern Peripheral Route, I would imagine. Who is in charge of Aberdeen City Council at this moment in time? Is it Barney Crockett, the President or the Presidium? Is it Willie Young, the General Secretary? Is it Zarina Mary Bolton? Or is there a Rasputin in the background? And the reality is that the Council Group are very unhappy at the interference there's been from certain quarters. Gordon Graham wrote to Willie Young in an email on the 7th of March, "I write to express my concern that Lewis MacDonald MSP is stating on radio today that if Labour are elected at the local council elections, then this project will not go ahead. This is not the decision made at a group meeting last night, and I'm extremely concerned that it appears as if someone has sanctioned Lewis to speak on our behalf. I also reserve the right to refute what Lewis is saying and say that we have reservations over the funding. However, no decisions has been made by the Labour group." Rasputin-like interference from outside, it seems. Now, what I really want to know is what is the future for Aberdeen-City-Centre? I hope it's a bright future with real vision. Let democracy reign, listen to the people, and let's go ahead with the City Garden project.
Thank you very much. I call Richard Baker to be followed by Brian Adam.
Presiding Officer, let me acknowledge...
Sorry, speeches of 4 minutes, Mr Baker.
Thank you. Presiding Officer, let me acknowledge from the outset that Mr Stewart has brought to the Chamber today a very important issue. And like others, I recognise the generosity of the offer of the contribution from Sir Ian Wood for the City Gardens project, and he deserves credit for focusing minds on the future of Aberdeen. But the City Gardens project divided Aberdeen. That is what is evident from a narrow result in the referendum after what was a skewed process, with Ofcom finding today that rules on advertising had been breached, as also evident from the consultation where the majority opposed the scheme. And when we hear talk of democracy, let us remember, even if it's painful for the SNP, it was Labour who won the most councillors at the election in May in Aberdeen. It was Labour, that is why it's Labour who lead a coalition administration. And the mandate on which Labour councillors were elected was not to proceed with the City Gardens project. Now, some members tonight might suggest the Labour group should break its own electoral mandate. Shows what a tenuous grip on the concept of democracy they have. And to describe those who don't support the City Gardens project as therefore against all development and who say a message has been sent from Aberdeen against development, I think it's this hyperbole which lets the city down. Stewart.
Kevin-Stewart.
The accusation of being anti-development is probably the right one. Anti the Third Dawn Crossing, anti-Hadigan, anti-Stadium, anti-City Garden project. What are Labour actually for in Aberdeen?
Richard Baker.
And it's astonishing that Kevin-Stewart should criticise the Labour Party on the Hadigan roundabout when it is the Scottish Government who have decided by their own decisions to delay for years of progress we should be making now at the Hadigan roundabout. And I think that shows the paucity of Mr Stewart's argument, who seems to be trying to blame Aberdeen City Council Labour for everything, including the poor summer we've had. So while I respect the views of those who genuinely believed the City Gardens project was the right way forward, those who didn't support that project also what's best for the city and want development which works. The fact of the matter is A City Garden project involved nearly £100 million of borrowing for the council on the basis of a business case which didn't stack up. It was based on huge assumptions. Much of the additional revenue which was forecast depended on infrastructure investment, not in the city centre, but actually in the north of the city. In terms of design, this was a massively risky and complex exercise, and the potential for overspend enormous, as we in this building should be well aware. We need development, but it must be development which will work. I didn't support no development at Union Terrace Gardens. My preferred option was to proceed with the Peacock Contemporary Arts Centre, an exciting and affordable project which would have breathed new life into the gardens. Those supporting this motion may crave political capital, but I know so many people who support the resolve of the Labour group on this issue and other councillors too. But the key issue now is to realise that the debate has been concluded on the City Gardens project. It's time to move on, and that is the view of all the groups in the administration. The administration of the City Council is committed to development in a city which will genuinely bring economic benefit. And that's why right now the City Council is developing a revised business case. It would be great folly for ministers to reject this business case before receiving it, particularly as they supported the City Gardens project before they even saw the business case for that. Rather than seek to punish Aberdeen for not supporting their preferred project, how much better would it be for ministers to accept the decision of the Council and work with them to bring forward and support a revised business case and invest in Aberdeen as they seek to invest in other cities? I believe what the great majority of people in Aberdeen now want is not a sterile debate on the decision which has been taken, but for ministers now to work with the Council to bring forward development in Aberdeen which is affordable and will genuinely bring the benefits to the local economy we want to see.
Many thanks. I now call Brian Adam to be followed by Nanette Milne.
Presiding Officer, it's a privilege to be here and to speak in this debate. I notice that the Chamber tonight has 5 former councillors representing Aberdeen and one representing Aberdeenshire. I was on the District Council with Nanette Milne and then on the City Council with Nanette Milne. My colleagues Kevin-Stewart and Mark MacDonald served on the City Council until quite recently, and my colleague Maureen Watt served on the Regional Council as well. And those of us who can cast our mind back a little way will remember that it was Grampian Regional Council, Labour-led, the late Robert Middleton, who introduced the dual carriageway down the Denburn, and then the District Council insisted that dual carriageway had sufficient strengthening to bear any development above it and over the railway line, because the vision for the City Garden project is a long-standing one which was not able to be delivered. But it certainly had public endorsement in the referendum, and Mr Stewart was perhaps a little modest in his in describing his involvement, but I think it is to his great credit and the great credit of Aberdeen City Council that they decided to consult properly with the people. And undoubtedly this is a controversial project, but nevertheless it did receive the endorsement of the people of Aberdeen. And I think it ill behoves Rhoda Grant to be questioning the validity or the circumstances of any such referendum. Labour's records in referenda are not that strong. I remember the 1979 referendum that was pottled, absolutely pottled by Labour MPs, and then ignored, even though there was a majority in favour of this place being taken up. Yes, Mr MacDonald.
Lewis MacDonald.
I'm very grateful to Mr Adam. Does he recognise the findings of the Ofcom report today about the lack of balance in the referendum process, where there were 338 radio broadcasts on one side of the argument and only 26 on the other, and where tens of thousands of very glossy leaflets were distributed through doors by groups which were not registered and had no limits on their campaign spending.
Brian Adam.
This continues the sour grapes that we've heard from the Labour Party again and again when their ideas have been rejected by the people. It is an unusual coalition administration that currently runs the City Council. I don't know how long it will last. I certainly hope that they can develop a vision for the city. There is little evidence that they have done so. Their alternative plans, kind of cobbled together, include the restoration of the Victorian toilets in the gardens. Now, of itself, that's not a bad idea. But given that they were also enthusiasts for the Peacock proposals, which fell by the wayside, which was undoubtedly going to encroach and, in some people's eyes, destroy the gardens, I think a little more consistency in their approach might be welcomed. And given that we've had accusations thrown about in recent times that the Aberdeen has not had a fair share, when I came to this Parliament, we in a situation where we had 10% of the population with 10% of the hospital activity, but only 9% of the funding. And I think it's to the great credit of the Scottish Government that that is being unwound now. Similarly,
must ask you to come to a conclusion.
Yes. Similarly with Grampian Police Force funding, that's sorted, and we delivered changes in the funding for the City Council that will allow developments to take place. It's just a pity we don't have people in charge of the city that respect the citizens or indeed have a vision, a positive vision for the future of the city. Thank you.
Thank you. Nanette Mellon to be followed by Graham Day.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm happy to support Kevin-Stewart's motion this evening, and I congratulate him for bringing this crucial issue for Aberdeen to the floor of this chamber once again. As you know, Presiding Officer, I'm passionate about my city's future, and my confidence in that has been significantly undermined by what I regard as an affront to democracy when Aberdeen City Council 2 weeks ago pulled the plug on the best opportunity offered to us in my lifetime to transform our city centre and secure its long-term future as a city with international appeal. And that, after a referendum which achieved a 4,000 majority on a 52% turnout of the electorate, a significantly more decisive vote than that which has given us the Labour-led City Council, which many of us are already ashamed of. Last Friday, I attended a summit meeting in Aberdeen run by ACCEF, the business-led organisation which is doing so much good work to develop the economy of the city and its hinterland, to discuss the region's economic future. Speaker after speaker extolled the virtues and assets which the area has, the large number of businesses prospering within the oil and gas sector, the excellence of our universities and further education colleges, our magnificent scenery and locally produced food, so beloved of visitors to the area, and the work going on into attracting new business and developing a skilled young workforce to face the challenges of the future. There are so many positives in the North East, but at the ACCEF summit, nearly every speaker sounded a note of caution following the Council's decision on the City Garden project. And everyone I spoke to privately, each one a success in the business world, was shocked and despondent about what had happened at the last Council meeting. The local papers are full of correspondence very largely opposed to the Council's actions, and my family tell me that the social media is buzzing with anger at what has happened. But do Council members show any contrition or accept that their electorate may be right in what they want for the city's future? Not a bit of it. Despite the anger around what they've done, they tell us the debate is over. And the time, I'll take no intervention from Labour, as Mr MacDonald well knows in this matter. But do they listen to the electorate and think that they might be right in what they want for the city's future? Not a bit of it. Despite the anger around what they've done, they tell us the debate is over and that the time has come to move on with unplanned, uncosted and unfinanced cosmetic improvements to the city centre as put forward by the independent group. Do they not realise that Aberdeen-City-Centre needs transformation, not just a superficial facelift? The Council may think the debate is over, but the citizens do not. And the Council is quite wrong if it thinks it can stifle debate over such an important matter as the city's future. I know Aberdeen is a great city,
Mark MacDonald.
I wonder if Ms Milne would agree with me that it is entirely hypocritical for those who refused to move on after the referendum result to now suggest that everybody else should move on after this anti-democratic decision.
Annette Milne, you're in your last minute.
I can't possibly disagree with that. I know Aberdeen's a great city. I've lived there and worked with citizens longer than most of the current councillors. But at the present time, it's not an attractive place to arrive in, as I see every Thursday evening when I return home from here. Indeed, the city centre is a complete turn-off from visitors to the city, as we see increasingly in the P&J letters pages. Titivating Union Terrace Gardens and reopening its toilets and resurrecting the age-old plans to pedestrianise Union Street are not the answer. Transformation is what's needed, and that's what the City Garden project has to offer. I'm glad that ACSEF has stated that this project is still one of its policy objectives, and I'm pleased and humbled that Sir Ian Wood has not totally closed the door on future philanthropy from him towards the benefit of the city. The Labour Council leaders' responses to questions at the ACSEF summit were derisory, and many heads were shaking with disbelief and dismay of what he had, or rather didn't have, to offer. If that's the leadership within Aberdeen City Council, then I, along with many other Aberdonians, want nothing of it. We'll not forget the fantastic opportunity so arrogantly thrown away by Labour, the Independents and those Liberal Democrats who voted against the City Garden project, and I'm in no doubt they'll be punished at the ballot box at the next first available opportunity, unless they now listen to the majority of people in Aberdeen who want to see a city centre worthy of the energy capital of Europe and take steps to deliver the transformational change which is required in a 21st century city aspiring to be the city of culture.
Thank you. And I call Graham Day to be followed by Alison McInnes.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. My colleague Kevin-Stewart is to be congratulated for securing this important debate, though I wish it was one we weren't having to have. Far rather, the city centre of Aberdeen was to be respected and admired, or it seemed possible just a few short months ago, at least was headed in the direction of again being held in esteem. I come at this from the standpoint of an expat Aberdonian, proud to say I was born and raised in the Granite City, but frankly embarrassed by the state of its heart. The condition of the centre of Aberdeen is a subject that has long travelled the vast majority of Aberdonians, those still living there and those who, like myself, retain a fondness for the place, even though they've moved on. 36 years ago, as a teenage Harlow Academy pupil, I had a letter published in the Evening Express raising concerns about plans to construct the first of the now 4, I think it is, massive shopping developments in the city centre. In the letter, well, actually it was a poem, and I'm thankful to say I don't retain a copy of it to quote from. I called on the Unionist Council administration not to rip the heart out of Union Street by going down the road of allowing massive shopping centres to take a grip. But my pleas, along with those of many other Aberdonians, fell on deaf ears, and they ripped the heart out of Union Street and, for that matter, George Street as well. There's nothing wrong as such with the likes of the Trinity, Bonaccord or St Nicholas centres. The problem is that when you wander through these places, you could be anywhere. It could be Edinburgh, Dundee, Glasgow. They do not provide a truly distinct experience. They do not reflect the once magnificence of Aberdeen or complement an iconic heart, and their existence has decimated the main thoroughfare. Times change, of course they do, and the expectations of shoppers are different to what they were 30 years ago. But I ask anyone who knows the Granite City, look 200 yards either side of the Union Street, Market Street lights and tell me the centre of Aberdeen over the last few decades has changed for the better. So, like many Aberdonians, I was delighted to learn of the innovative plans to revitalise the heart of the Granite City, based around Union Terrace Gardens, but also encompassing the Denburn and St Nicholas House areas. Plans offering a much-needed economic boost and the prospect of revitalising and restoring pride in the heart of the city. And bettering the environment around Union Street would, in my opinion, inevitably have led to tackling the Union Street issue. Now, I know these plans did not attract universal support, but the people of Aberdeen had their say in a referendum, and that should have been that. Instead, Europe's oil capital finds itself in danger of becoming a laughingstock. While 60-odd miles down the road in Dundee, they're unveiling a visionary redevelopment of the waterfront area. In Aberdeen, we're being offered restored public conveniences and a cafe in Union Terrace Gardens. When I left Aberdeen for the City of Discovery in 1985, I could never have imagined that the former, which was absolutely booming at the time, would be overtaken by the latter as a magnet for shoppers and day trippers. But if we aren't there yet, then I fear we're certainly headed that way. Presiding Officer, there was a good reason for Sir Ian Wood coming forward with this private finance offer for the project that he did. He's a proud Aberdonian who wants better for his home city, and there are plenty like him: Brian Adam, Kevin-Stewart, Mark MacDonald, myself, Annette Milne, to name but 5. Even the Labour Party, in their heart of hearts, must recognise that, as Kevin-Stewart says in his concluding his motion, Aberdeen City Centre needs transformational change. If they don't, then they should step aside and let those who understand what's required to get on with the job.
Thank you. I now call Alison McInnes to be followed by Maureen Watt.
Thank you. Well, it's usual in members' debate to say at the start how pleased we are to be taking part in the debate, but that's not the case tonight. I'm disappointed that we not only have to debate the overturning of the outcome of a properly held local referendum, but that we must also face up to the fact that the new Labour administration in Aberdeen lacks ambition for the city. When the City Garden project was first mooted, I did have reservations about it. In particular, I was dismayed that the Peacock project was a casualty of the process. However, I accepted that the City Council took the decision to move forward to the design stage. And in fact, the design competition took the debate forward. It opened people's eyes up to the possibilities. The decision to hold a referendum reassured people that everyone's views would be taken into account. There was a clear result in the referendum, and that should have established the project in principle, in my view. But no, the new Labour administration has pulled the plug on it. And the challenge now, I think, is not to keep harping back, but to find a way out of the mess. I'm dismayed that Aberdeen is now known as the Disney of the North. It doesn't want this and it doesn't want that. In fact, the biggest worry is that it doesn't know what it does want. All of the indications so far show that the Labour administration has no coherent vision for the city. Rather than starting out commanding trust and commitment, they've embarked on the road of confrontation and imposition, and that's not how modern councils should operate. Kevin-Stewart's motion rightly recognises that Aberdeen-City-Centre needs transformational change. I agree. As the energy capital, Aberdeen powers the economy of the region and well beyond. To maintain that prosperity, we must recognise that change is needed. If our region is to remain competitive, then our city centre must compare well with other European cities. Aberdeen would benefit from having a more vibrant city centre. We know that research has demonstrated that it's a key component of competitive regions. Some very poor planning decisions over the years have changed the way the city centre is used, and the shopping centre areas are now quite disconnected. The main thoroughfare of Union Street is in an almost terminal decline. Nanette spoke about the ACCEF, the City and Shire Economic Future. That's a public-private partnership that brings together councils, Scottish Enterprise, the local Chamber of Commerce, Skills Development Scotland, Visit Scotland and representatives from business and academia. And it was set up to bring a collaborative approach to growing the economy and enhancing the quality of life in the region. And it has been an exemplar for other regions in Scotland. Its vision of a region that has one of the most robust and resilient economies in Europe, with a reputation for opportunity, enterprise and inventiveness, that will attract and retain world-class talent of all ages, is surely one we can all share. And yet this summer, I heard that there's a question mark hanging over the City Council's ongoing participation in ACCEF. Such insularity will not serve the city well, and I urge the city leaders to think again. There are many good reasons to locate business in Aberdeen, but there are growing disincentives. The lack of an integrated transport network, for example, and the lack of a vibrant city centre. And while we can look to the government to tackle the first, we must rely on the local council to drive forward the latter. I urge the City Council to put engagement and openness at the heart of how it does business from here on in, and to think big for our city. Kevin-Stewart talked earlier about 19th century architects. Excuse me, perhaps the Council could learn from the words of Daniel Burnham. He was an American architect and urban planner who played a leading role in the master planning of Chicago and Washington, D.C. a century ago. He said, make no little plans. They have no magic to stir men's bloods and probably themselves will not be realised. Make big plans, aim high and hope and work, remembering that a noble logical diagram, once recorded, will not die, but long after we are gone, will be a living thing asserting itself with ever-growing insistence.
Thank you. Now call Maureen Watt to be followed by Lewis MacDonald.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I congratulate Kevin-Stewart for securing this debate this evening and bringing to the Parliament the disgraceful situation that the citizens of Aberdeen find themselves in today, where their democratic will in a referendum, securing votes, more votes than anybody in the council elections and indeed in the Scottish Parliament elections, has been overturned. Now, members may think that this is purely an Aberdeen issue, but let me remind members why it should not be. Aberdeen City and Shire, as others have mentioned, is driving economic growth in Scotland and the UK throughout our energy sector. It is the only truly global economy in the UK outside London. It is an area which is a supply chain hub for the oil and gas industry and jobs throughout the UK and beyond. It used to be said that if you wanted to see the world, you joined the Merchant Navy, but now you join the oil and gas industry to see the world. The energy sector in Aberdeen is booming. In fact, Aberdeen, the whole of Aberdeen, is booming on the back of that. Aberdeen has long been recognised as the oil capital of Europe, and it is one of the most robust and resilient economies in the continent. The region has the second highest GVA per head of population in the UK, and the Cities Outlook 2012 survey placed Aberdeen as one of only a handful of cities with the strongest signs of economic growth. Indeed, at the meeting that Nanette Milne mentioned on Friday, we heard of one company, General Electric, who has immediately 200 vacancies, and over the next 3 years it will have 3,000 vacancies. But does the centre of Aberdeen reflect this status? No, it does not. I stood for election in Aberdeen North in 1979, saying that Aberdeen should not be the oil capital of Europe, but end up with nothing to show for it. But now we have a local boy made exceptionally good, wanting to reinvest some of his wealth back into the city, together with 7 others prepared to put their hands in their pockets to kickstart the regeneration of the city of Aberdeen. So much has been focused in the gardens, and I believe that that would have been transformational, but it also included a revamp of the art gallery and many other parts of the city centre which desperately need work done on them. So it's incredulous that an arrogant, petty, stagnant Labour-led administration rejected the wishes of Aberdonians to transform their city, and without an alternative plan.
Lewis MacDonald.
I'm very grateful to Maureen Watt for taking an intervention. What would she have said if Labour had stood on a platform of not proceeding with the City Garden project and then had changed their mind after winning the election?
Maureen Watt.
I reckon the people of Aberdeen would have clapped their hands in glee and would have said that at last the Labour administration had seen sense. There is currently a collective gloom in the city. And an incredulity there and beyond that anybody could be so stupid to reject such a generous offer from the private sector in Aberdeen. Other areas are coming and saying, can we have the money if Aberdeen doesn't want it? It's not only this, but the petty city councillors threatened, as Alison McInnes alluded to cut off the funding from ACCEF, which is the economic driver in the region. I'm glad that Sir Ian Wood has left his offer on the table, and I hope that some councillors, with all the lobbying they have had from their constituents, will change their minds. The transformational change required is within the Labour-led administration to get the transformation we need in the city centre.
Thank you. Before I call the next member, and so that I can call the members still wishing to speak in the debate, I'm minded to accept a motion under Rule 8.14.3 that the debate be extended by up to 30 minutes. Perhaps Kevin-Stewart would wish to formally move that motion.
Formally moved, Presiding Officer.
Many thanks. Is that agreed? Thank you very much. I now call Lewis MacDonald to be followed by Mark MacDonald.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. There are 3 possible responses to the decision of Aberdeen City Council on Union Terrace Gardens. One is outrage, and we've heard plenty of that this evening, sadly tinged once again by far too much personal abuse. Absolutely. Another is delight, and if those who disagreed with the Council are entitled to their views, then so are the many thousands of Aberdonians who are absolutely delighted by the final outcome. But the third possible response is to acknowledge that the decision was properly made by those duly elected to make it, and then to move on to work together in the interests of the city and the region. That is the response of Fraser Forsyth, leader of the Conservative group on Aberdeen City Council, who was a strong supporter of the City Garden project. He told the Press and Journal last week that it would be detrimental for the city to keep talking about a project that was rejected. It's time to move on and focus instead on finding alternative proposals to regenerate the city centre. Councillor Forsyth's views are important. His was the only party to put support for the City Garden project at the centre of their election campaign. And if Conservative councillors are clear that the project is dead, then dead it is. And all the gurning in the world will not bring it back when such a key supporter says that the time for debate is over and the time has come to move on. Of course.
Richard Lyons.
Can I ask Lewis MacDonald, if the case is made for another project, would you put that out to referendum and accept the findings?
Lewis MacDonald.
As the Labour Group on Aberdeen City Council made very clear at the time, a referendum was not an appropriate way to make a borrowing decision on behalf of a public authority, and that's why they did not support that approach. So now it's for ministers to choose, either to follow Fraser Forsyth's example and support future investment in Aberdeen City Centre, or else to do as some of the backbenchers have suggested, take the huff and walk away. But Aberdeen's success is too important to the Scottish economy to be put on hold. And I hope ministers will now step back from some of the rash words we have heard in recent days and consider Aberdeen's revised bid for tax increment funding on its merits. There are plenty of reasons for government to invest in the success of Aberdeen, as colleagues will know who attended the local economic summit on Friday afternoon. Mark Higginson of PricewaterhouseCoopers told us that Aberdeen must attract 120,000 new recruits by 2022 if it is to realise its potential as a global energy capital, while Derek Provan of Aberdeen Airport warned that future development could be put at risk by a lack of investment in the already congested road system. And that's why it should be welcome that Aberdeen City Council confirmed today that improved public transport access to the airport could be achieved under a revised TIF bid. Paul Skinner of Infrastructure UK also spoke on Friday, and we heard that the UK Treasury is willing to consider supporting a bond issue by Aberdeen City Council to pay for essential infrastructure, a bond issue worth up to £500 million, which would certainly be of interest to those many oil companies keen to invest in the city's future success. I commend UK ministers for their willingness to work with the City Council to enable essential infrastructure to be built, recognising as they do the huge contribution which Aberdeen City and Shire make to the UK economy. The question is whether, after 13 years of devolution, the current Scottish Government can match that commitment. That choice is for SNP ministers to make. The time for outrage or for delight over last month's decision is surely over. We need leaders who are big enough to go beyond emotional responses and who are prepared to work together to agree on what must be done and how. If local government and Westminster can work together to fulfil Aberdeen's global potential, the Holyrood government must surely not be left behind.
Many thanks. I now call Mark MacDonald.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Let's deal with some myths that are going around. Firstly, on the referendum. Crawford Langley oversaw the referendum, a man whose reputation is beyond question when it comes to overseeing elections and voting processes. He himself had no qualms about the fairness of the outcome of the referendum. Indeed, the question that was put in the referendum was that which was worded by the Friends of Union Terrace Gardens, a campaign group who opposed the City Garden project. That was the wording which was chosen by the City Council. And Mike Shepherd of the Friends of Union Terrace Gardens stated at the council meeting following the referendum that if the result had gone the way he wanted it to, he would have accepted it. Therefore, it was not the referendum process that was flawed, merely the result was not that which those who campaigned against it wanted, so they sought to undermine the process of the referendum. It's very clear that the people expressed their will in the referendum. but Labour has imposed its will on the people of Aberdeen. That is the difference, because the scheme which was put forward at the council meeting was not one which had featured in any manifesto of anybody standing for election and had no basis of public support. One of the key tests which the government stated during the TIF pilot process that it wanted to see achieved, public support, that which was achieved by the referendum. Now, I was a convert to this project. It took time for me to consider things like the design and its potential, but once I had seen the design brought forward from the City Garden Trust, I was a convert to it. The granite web, Mr MacDonald, that's clearly what I was talking about. I would have respected the result of the referendum, whichever way it had gone. If the result had gone in favour of retention of Union Terrace Gardens, I would have respected that, but it did not go that way, and those who are now choosing to impose their will should reflect on that. I was interested by the remarks of Richard Baker about how this was about Labour keeping manifesto pledges and keeping manifesto commitments. Because in the papers recently, they've been very keen on pushing the notion of Union Street pedestrianisation. And I found a leaflet from the council election put out in the Tory Ferryhill ward by Yvonne Allen, who's now a councillor and deputy convener of the Finance Committee, and Catherine Russell, who was the unsuccessful candidate. And in that leaflet, Catherine says, "The pedestrianisation of Union Street would increase traffic congestion in Ferryhill. Yvonne and I would oppose such proposals." So, prior to the election, opposing the pedestrianisation of Union Street, now in power, proposing it. I don't have a problem if people recognise that the facts and circumstances surrounding projects change. The facts surrounding the City Garden project did not change. The people supported it, and it should have been up to the Labour Party to be grown up enough to accept that result. And let's look at the issue of TIF funding, because Labour put up several straw men during the course of the City Garden project and its evolution. They first of all attacked the general concept and the argument of simply doing what was proposed anyway, despite the fact, as my colleague Brian Adams so eloquently described, it was being proposed by Labour councillors in the past. Indeed, Len Ironside, currently convener of social work on the council, during his time as council leader, proposed a Millennium Square, which would have had very much the similar effect of covering over the Denburn and raising Union Terrace Gardens to street level. They then attacked the aesthetics by talking about the design and how unattractive the design was. Both of these arguments were resoundingly defeated by the referendum result, so they then removed those to the side and started to attack the funding model. And that was where they put most of their ammunition between the referendum result and the decision in August last. Yet, TIF, which they have attacked so vehemently, is something which they are now saying we should give to the City Council for as yet unspecified, uncosted projects. They cannot have it both ways. They have killed the goose that laid the golden egg by rejecting this project, and that will be their legacy, and it will be to their eternal shame.
Thank you. I now invite Derek Mackay to wind up the debate. Minister, you have 7 minutes.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I thank Kevin-Stewart for bringing this very timely motion to the Chamber? I think it's timely because there still does exist an opportunity to take this issue forward in relation to Aberdeen-City-Centre and Aberdeen City Council following the decision of the City Council at the end of August to abandon Aberdeen City's Garden project. And Lewis MacDonald did mention the record of this administration in relation to Aberdeen, and I think the SNP has a very proud and strong record in supporting the city and all cities, but particularly the city of Aberdeen, whether it's addressing the financial concerns around grant distribution or the massive investment of the city, or indeed some of my colleagues in a previous life as elected members sorting out the local finances of Aberdeen City Council as well. The future of Aberdeen is not just crucial to Aberdeen, though, and the people of Aberdeen, but to the whole of Scotland, such as the scale and significance of that great city. Aberdeen is Europe's energy capital. Globally, it has been recognised as the second highest concentration of offshore energy expertise after Houston, Texas. It's home to multinational operators and contractors, as well as many Scottish supply and service companies. The city is renowned for its technology and skills, supported by 2 universities and 2 colleges of further education. The energy industry also supports a thriving business community with a robust professional and financial services sector. I could go on about the strengths of Aberdeen, but we want to focus on the opportunities that have been presented to Aberdeen. We had therefore noted with great interest the proposals to transform Aberdeen-Centre by redeveloping the Union Terrace Gardens to boost the city's prospects for further global investment. Following international competition to redesign the Union Terrace Gardens, it was announced in January that the Granite Web proposal had been chosen as the winning entry for the City Garden project. The design sought to transform the gardens into a contemporary space for park and cultural activities. In February of this year, a referendum took place in Aberdeen. The residents participating were asked to choose between retaining the existing Union Terrace Gardens or replacing them with the proposed City Garden project design. The facts speak for themselves. Some 165,830 voting packs were sent out, with 86,568 votes cast, a turnout of some 52%, which far exceeded many people's expectations. On 2nd of March, it was announced that 45,301 people had voted for the City Garden project design. 41,175 had voted for retaining the Union Terrace Gardens. Voters had therefore backed the project by a majority of 4,126. The point...
Lewis MacDonald. I'm very grateful to the Minister. The Scottish Future Trust, as he will know, required that TIF bids should include enabling infrastructure. Could he tell us what enabling infrastructure was included in the original bid? And can he also tell us whether an increased amount of enabled infrastructure in a revised bid might not indeed strengthen the TIF bid that has been made to him?
I can say to Mr MacDonald, I don't have that information to hand. I'm happy to provide it to him. But what I do have is the advice that the Council gave to councillors and Scottish Government, which I'll be returning to very shortly. The demonstration of public support for the project was an essential step in taking forward the City's tax incremental finance proposal. Mr MacDonald has made the point that the City Council had a mandate not to proceed with the project. I would argue that the referendum was the mandate to deliver, because councils will be elected on a range of promises. To level of the argument that Mr MacDonald has done would suggest that the SNP has a mandate to go straight to independence for Scotland by virtue of the fact we won the election. Well, of course, a referendum is a far more appropriate way to test any particular proposition, as attractive as that concept is, of course.
Richard Baker.
Is Mr Mackay aware of the finding of the Ofcom today that in the referendum advertising codes was breached in terms of their rules? And does he not realise that that is a serious issue in terms of the fairness of the referendum being carried out? Is he dismissing those concerns by Ofcom?
I'm happy to confirm that I have a minister with a very strong record now, as per the Electoral Commission's report into running elections, and I happen to believe that the findings of that referendum are robust, and I am confident that they reflected the wishes of the people of Aberdeen. We therefore, on the back of public support, wish to consider Aberdeen's plans further to use tax incremental finance to redevelop the Union Terrace Gardens because of the potential of the proposal specifically to lever in private sector contributions, potentially some £55 million from private donors, and improve local confidence. But in view of the local situation, it was necessary to gauge that public support, which I do believe was demonstrated through the referendum. Following the referendum result in favour of the project, we've been looking forward to receiving a full TIF business case showing how TIF would be used to support the investment of 92, of course.
Kevin-Stewart.
Is a proud man from Renfrew. If a local Renfrew person offered £50 million worth of investment for a project in your town, which was backed by the public in your town, do you think that Renfrewshire Council should bite their hands off to take that money?
Mr Stewart, I can't think of any circumstances in which the people of Renfrew would turn down a donation of £55 million to their community, and in so doing turn down government support that could refresh their city centre or their town centre in the way that the Labour Party in Aberdeen has done. It is therefore surprising and disappointing to learn that the Council had, on the 22nd of August, voted to abandon the City Garden project. In so doing, in the full knowledge that that terminates that application bid, which otherwise could have been progressed to support that regeneration of Aberdeen. And why am I so confident? Because I have here the advice given by the Council to councillors, which said, without the private sector donations and the scale of the City Garden project, the other 4 projects are not viable as a TIF scheme. This is because these other projects cannot lever sufficient private finance. So there we have it. Nanette Millen is absolutely correct. It is Labour who have pulled the plug on this scheme for the City of Aberdeen, of course.
Lewis MacDonald.
I asked the Minister again about the criteria for the application. Will he not confirm that there was no requirement for private sector engagement in the original invitation to bid, and that what was required was that the bid should be not led by retail, should incorporate enabling infrastructure component larger than £20 million and not have a renewables focus? And does he not agree that a revised TIF bid will meet those criteria?
Minister, and I'd be obliged if you'd begin to conclude.
I can confirm that the progress being made with the Aberdeen application was in harmony with what the Scottish Government was looking for. What Labour have done in Aberdeen is pull the plug on the established process and also going back to square one, signalling a substantial change in any potential application, no tested public support and no obvious private sector contributions. A complete change to that which was presented previously, which inspired so much confidence. Now, there is time yet, Presiding Officer. I will close, but I'll close with an opportunity. This project need not be dead. The Labour Party may have killed off their aspirations this week, but I know that the Labour Party are not necessarily averse to U-turns, especially if it might be in the interests of people they represent. I would encourage the Labour Party in Aberdeen to take the opportunity to bring back their priority status that they had enjoyed, to return to the Scottish Government with a business case that involved the City Gardens, and we will look again at making that project happen. Otherwise, the Labour Party in Aberdeen will be foregoing that very generous priority status which they were enjoying.
Thank you. That concludes Kevin-Stewart's members' debate on Aberdeen City Centre, and I now close this meeting of Parliament.